I want to welcome everybody back to the Fitsnews studio for our week in review. I've got my Fender shirt on. That means I'm ready to rock. I hope you are too, because we've got a lot to cover this week. 3 big breaking news stories in the Murdaugh Murders crime and corruption saga. We're going to cover all of those for you, as we did on Fitsnews all week. We've got the governor of South Carolina, Henry McMaster, once again acting as a sock puppet for special interests. We've got developments on the congressional front, including a visit from the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, to South Carolina, which we will be attending. And also, we've got Lin Wood, the famed First Amendment attorney turned political provocateur in South Carolina, pulling a gun. Yeah, all that and more coming your way on the Week in Review. All right, so our top Murdaugh story this week involved the deposition of Chad Westendorf, who is the vice president at Palmetto State Bank. This is the financial institution which has become embroiled in the various Murdaugh family law firm financial crimes. So this deposition, folks, it's something. You can watch the whole thing on Fitsnews. We posted the entire deposition, but it shocked people. It truly shocked people, because they're watching this guy who's supposed to be, a leader of a financial institution, and he just didn't come across as somebody with that skill set. In fact, let's take a listen to one of these clips.
What was your job? As PR, tell me what you were supposed to do.
I don't know.
What is wrong with this guy? Is something wrong with this guy? I mean, he looks like a deer in headlights. He looks, glasses need a new prescription for starters. I mean, the guy looks just, anyway, here's another clip in which, again, the attorney questioning him, Eric Bland, asks a very basic question. Let's hear the question.
Did you understand that as a personal representative that you were a fiduciary? Do you understand the term fiduciary?
I did not.
Okay. Do you understand it now?
Not really.
Okay.
I'm sorry. You're not supposed to say retarded in this day and age, are you? But I mean, something's wrong with this guy. I mean, this guy's special needs. I mean, what is wrong with this dude? Fiduciary. I literally am the world's worst financial manager. If you entrusted me with your money, it would vanish. And I know what fiduciary means. I can at least say it, Depositions are just weird things. It's just interesting to see how people respond. I mean, there's deposition cool, like take Bill Clinton. Depends on what the meaning of the word is. I mean, that sounds stupid, but it's stone cold smart. I mean, the dude might as well whipped out a saxophone or a cigar. Well, maybe not a cigar. We won't go there. But that's smart obstruction, or smart deflection, or smart whatever you want to call it, in getting out of having to answer questions in a deposition. This guy, I mean, I don't know what's wrong with this guy, but clearly not compos mentis. But anyway, the Westendorf tape, you can view it in its entirety on Fitsnews. And Mandy Matney, our news director, who's been on this story from the very beginning. In fact, it was her reporting that really got the ball rolling on a lot of these lines of inquiry. Mandy's got a great story up on that on Fitsnews, so we'd encourage you to check that out as we move on to the next chapter of the Murdaugh saga this week. All right, so we got one more Murdaugh-related item, and then I promise we will get on to other stuff. Although every time I try to get on to other stuff, I look at the hit counters on the site, Dylan, and it's like, we should just be like the Murdaugh Network, man, because that stuff is like crack. People are just addicted to this case. I think I said fentanyl last week, didn't I? Yeah. How did that reference go over? Not Dylan's kind of making this sign. For those of you listening, my inappropriate references are piling up over here. And it's funny, we do these shows, and sometimes we capture hot takes where I say inappropriate things offline, but increasingly I'm just going ahead and saying them online. But anyway, last Murdaugh update. I want to talk about indictments. We were expecting an additional round of indictments this week. In fact, we've been expecting it for several weeks now, because it's been a while since any new indictments have been issued in connection with the Murdaugh Murders crime and corruption saga. At last count, Alex Murdaugh facing several dozen charges alleging that he's stolen nearly $9 million from former clients. We've been waiting for new charges. We've been waiting for co-conspirators to be charged. Most significantly, we have been waiting for law enforcement officers and prosecutors to announced charges in connection with the double homicide last June at Moselle, which was the Murdaugh family hunting lodge. This was the crime which left 52-year-old Maggie Murdaugh, Alex's wife, and 22-year-old Paul Murdaugh, his youngest son, dead of gunshot wounds. Maggie Murdaugh died of wounds from an assault rifle. Paul Murdaugh died of 2 shotgun blasts. We are still awaiting a narrative as to what happened to them, who was there, who may have been involved. And again, all we know at this point is what law enforcement said in the immediate aftermath of those slayings, which was that there was no danger to the public. And again, that was a very telling remark, indicating that they had a sense of who may have been behind it. Fitsnews, within 48 hours of the killings, reported that Alex Murdaugh was a person of interest in connection with the double homicide. His attorneys have since confirmed that. But again, we are awaiting charges related to that incident, which is the highest profile of the ongoing state investigations. But we're also looking at the ongoing federal inquiry, which has ramped up considerably in recent weeks, as there is a clear federal component to the alleged criminal empire that the Murdaughs and their associates were running down there in the South Carolina Low Country. But expecting indictments this week, we didn't get any. We are expecting them imminently, though, and in fact, one of the co-conspirators that we believe is going to be included in the next round of indictments is Corey Fleming, who is a attorney that worked with Alex Murdaugh, who was involved in some of these alleged settlement scams, and it is believed that he will be among the first co-conspirators to be indicted. But again, we are still waiting for the official word from the Office of the Attorney General and the statewide grand jury, which is the entity conducting those investigations. But for all the latest on any indictments related to the Murdaugh Murders, crime, and corruption saga, keep it tuned to Fitsnews. All right, so for those of you who don't remember, a few months ago we did a story on South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster and his subservience to Duke Energy. And Dylan Nolan, our director of special projects, did a funny little sock puppet video for that, because that's basically what the governor is. Duke tells him to jump. He asks very politely in his, well, ha-ha, because he's a big, guffawing caricature foghorn governor is what they call him down here. He's like Pappy from Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, right? The guy who's mass communicating. That's our governor, people. That's Henry McMaster. But Duke Energy is one of the companies that just tells them what to do on a daily basis. If they need something, he does it. Because again, he's not really a public servant. He's a special interest servant, okay? And Duke's in a bind. Duke was attempting to foist a multi-billion-dollar taxation without representation scheme on the ratepayers of South Carolina. They were basically trying to put us on the hook for a North Carolina law that's based entirely on Duke Energy's failure to adequately and responsibly manage its energy mix. Basically, Duke is in a position where they have to add a bunch of natural gas infrastructure very quickly to reduce their carbon footprint, but they are only going to add that gas infrastructure for so long because they are trying to meet a climate goal of carbon neutrality by 2050. So basically what they're doing, it's like a 30-year mortgage on a house, but they're only going to be in the house 15 years. So you're getting terrible prices. You're getting stranded assets, basically $5 billion worth of stranded assets, according to one report. And rather than absorb those like a private company that makes a boneheaded decision, they are passing them off onto the taxpayers of North Carolina and the ratepayers of North Carolina, because North Carolina lawmakers and the governor of North Carolina were dumb enough to go along with this. South Carolina lawmakers, oddly enough, here's a news flash, so far have not been dumb enough to go along with this scam. I know you're surprised. I'm summoning my surprise face as well. But South Carolina lawmakers have not had anything to do with this scam. And in fact, the Attorney General of South Carolina just last month came out and said this is unconstitutional because it is definitional taxation without representation. So the Attorney General forced Duke Energy to pull its petition to try to foist these billions of dollars in new costs onto South Carolina ratepayers. So Duke has found itself in a bind, people. They've been stonewalled by the Attorney General, who stood up for ratepayers, stood up for taxpayers, and said, no, this isn't legitimate. So now they have to go to plan B. They have to go to Governor McMaster. And what they're trying to do is get the governor to issue an executive order on climate change. Now, as I mentioned just a moment ago, the governor of South Carolina is not a woke, liberal, climate change kind of guy. Again, this is Foghorn Governor. This is the guy who still wears suits with the four-cornered napkin. What do they call that thing? The four-cornered. See, I need to go to Granger Owens and get hooked up because I don't even know what to call that thing you put in the vest pocket. But anyway, Henry McMaster hasn't changed his suit since the 1990s, people. That's what I'm trying to say. So he's not exactly hip to climate change. But if Duke Energy tells him to do it, I'm willing to wager he will do it. Because, again, that's what he's done ever since he's been elected. When Duke needs something, he is their go-to guy. So this executive order that is being contemplated would essentially establish a carbon goal for the state of South Carolina. And in theory, it sounds good. It sounds like, okay, well, that's a responsible thing. We should all try to strive for less carbon. Never mind that natural gas has been what's driven the reduction in carbon emissions in South Carolina and the rest of the country over the last decade. Let's forget about that for a moment. But if McMaster does this, he will essentially be usurping legislative authority because, for better or worse, and generally it's been worse, but the legislature has been in charge of South Carolina's energy policy. But now McMaster potentially taking a step ahead of them and potentially usurping that authority with this envisioned executive order. Now, when will this happen? That's a good question. My sources have told me that the governor wants to wait until after the filing period for partisan primaries. Even though the governor doesn't have credible opposition in his bid for a second full term in 2022, my sources tell me he doesn't want to leave anything to chance, and that if he is going to come out and issue this climate change executive order, that he wants to wait until after the filing period to do that. So this news outlet from the very beginning has been on top of this story. We were the first to report on Duke Energy's efforts to pass these costs on to taxpayers and ratepayers. We were the first to quantify those costs, to put a number on them. By the way, it's about $3 billion. And we will continue to follow this story as it now moves into a new realm, which is Duke Energy's attempt to get the governor of South Carolina to once again do their bidding. Keep up with that and more on Fitsnews as we continue to follow that developing story and many other energy issues. All right, so in the last segment, we were talking about South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster, and the term I was thinking of for his 1990s suits that he likes to wear, pocket square. That's the term I was thinking of, a pocket square. So Dylan Nolan, our director of special projects, pointed that out. So thanks, Dylan. But as we were discussing Governor McMaster and his subservience to corporate interests, particularly in this case, Duke Energy, we talked about how his decision-making might be impacted by the partisan primary schedule in South Carolina. Every 2 years, voters go to the polls in partisan primary elections, Republican and Democrat, to pick the candidates that they want to see on the ballot in the fall, in the November general election. So this year, there's been a lot of discussion about the scheduling of the primaries. Typically, they take place in June, with another 3 months, 4 months between then and the general election in November. But this year, there have been questions about when the primaries will be held due to a lawsuit filed by the NAACP against the state of South Carolina over the newly drawn district boundaries. And these are both the legislative districts and the congressional districts, because every 10 years, lawmakers have to redraw the political maps based on changes in population, shifts in population, growth in population. And so the political districts change every 10 years. And this process is always fraught with litigiousness. There's my $10 word for the podcast. But it's always fraught with legal challenges and legal battles. This year's no different. However, we have been delayed in the process because the census results were delayed due to COVID. But bottom line, we don't know when the elections are going to be held this year. We think they're going to be held on schedule in June, but we're not sure because this lawsuit, again, has the potential to completely blow the schedule up. As of this writing, filing for these partisan primary elections is actually scheduled to start next week, March the 16th, and it will close 2 weeks later on March the 30th. And that's the period during which, if you want to run for office in South Carolina as a Republican or a Democrat, that's the period where you have to decide that you are going to run because, again, the elections are held in June, and you have to submit your paperwork 3 months ahead of time to make sure that you appear on the ballot legally if you want to run in one of these primary elections. So we will continue to follow that issue very closely because, as we noted in the last segment, it could impact decisions that could impact your bottom line. I mean, you've got a governor who is actively weighing whether or not to issue an order that could have a huge cost, a multi-billion-dollar cost on South Carolina. And part of his calculus is when these primary elections are going to be held. So we pay attention to it because the politicians are paying attention to it. And it matters because, again, it could have a real impact on your bottom line. But stay tuned to Fitsnews for the latest on the election schedule as we prepare for the partisan primary elections for the Republicans and Democrats later this spring. All right, so one of the stories we've been covering for several weeks at Fitsnews is the proxy war that's taking place in a pair of South Carolina congressional districts between Donald Trump and the Republican establishment. Now, this is a repeat of a battle that took place back in 2016 when Trump was first running for president. And at that time, one of the top rivals to the former president, one of the top GOP establishment never-Trumpers, I guess they were called back then, was former Governor Nikki Haley. Haley and Trump are at it again this year, competing against each other in the South Carolina 1st Congressional District and maybe the 7th Congressional District. We'll have to wait and see what Nikki Haley does up there. But Trump has endorsed Katie Arrington, a former state representative in the South Carolina 1st District. That was news broken exclusively on Fitz. And Arrington is challenging Nancy Mace, who was one of the members of Congress who was sharply critical of Trump in the aftermath of the January 6th rioting at the U.S. Capitol. So Trump is headed to town this week. He's actually headed to Florence, South Carolina for a big rally on behalf of Arrington and on behalf of State Representative Russell Fry, who he has endorsed in the 7th District against incumbent Tom Rice. Rice, of course, was one of the 10 Republican members who voted to impeach Trump. So it's a big event. Thousands of people are expected to attend. And guess what, folks? We will be there. Not only will I be working the crowd, talking to people, interviewing folks, our Director of Special Projects, Dylan Nolan, will also be there conducting interviews, and we will be filming the rally in its entirety and publishing it on Fitsnews next week. So be on the lookout for that, as well as the fallout from this ongoing proxy war, which matters for several reasons, not only because it could help decide who represents South Carolina in 2 U.S. congressional districts, but also because it's a preview of the 2024 presidential battle, which, as regular readers, viewers, and listeners know, comes through South Carolina. The first in the South primary, it was the key to electing Donald Trump in 2016, and on the Democratic side, it was the key to electing Joe Biden in 2020. More than any other state in America, people, South Carolina picks presidents. And Fitsnews is always your first stop for the latest information on that battle. All right, so the last story I want to talk about this week is one we actually didn't cover this past week. It's one that's coming this week, but it was an interview that we conducted this week. I sat down with a guy named Dave Hancock. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with Dave, he was the executive director of a group called Fight Back, which was leading the charge to get bail money for Kyle Rittenhouse, was supporting Kyle Rittenhouse in the aftermath of the charges he was facing up there in Wisconsin, charges for which he was ultimately acquitted, incidentally. But Dave Hancock is just an incredibly interesting guy. He's a former Navy SEAL. And when I say Navy SEAL, I don't mean just any Navy SEAL. This guy was DEVGRU, people, for those of you unfamiliar with that. That's SEAL Team 6. This is like the elite Navy SEAL unit. This guy was a part of it, conducted multiple missions, 3 trips to Iraq, 3 trips to Afghanistan, literally got blown off of a rooftop and had to spend a year and a half learning to talk again from the massive head wound he sustained. Just an unbelievable story. But this guy has been at the center of a number of different conflicts. And so I thought it would be interesting, given the debate that's taking place in our country, a pretty one-sided debate, honestly, over foreign policy these days. I thought it would be interesting to get his take on when Americans should be put in foreign war zones. Here's what he had to say. What do you think when you look at these interventions abroad, the use of American military might abroad? What do you think the conditions should be for our engagement? I guess I'm asking to you, what's worth it, that kind of sacrifice that you're talking about?
It's an interesting question. I can share with you a story about sort of when things started changing for me, if you will.
Yeah.
They always say when you're just green and fired up, I mean, the idea to go through training and then get over there and apply your training for good is one of the best feelings in the world, right? And but ultimately, once you're over there, it's the guy standing next to you. That's what drives you to do everything that you're doing. Where I started seeing, I think I started having issues with some of the things that we were doing was I was 3 rotations in, 12 years, 11 and a half years or so. And we went after a target. And we went after the target. It was a shadow governor in Afghanistan. And we hit the target. We got immediate resistance. And one of my good friends and my team leader were killed on target. And I mean, that definitely really sucked, right? I mean, it was a hard hit, especially when we have such small units. But I think what sort of changed my calculus on a lot of this stuff was I think we were looking at targeting some other individual who had replaced the people that we killed on target that night. Right. So they almost just kind of fill these spots before the writing is dry on the wall. And at that point in time, I started to kind of feel as if we were targeting people just to keep moving along. But were we having a tangible effect on the battlefield? Right. And maybe that's just because I'm getting older and I'm higher ranking, so I'm starting to see a lot of the different calculus that goes into planning and selecting missions and the intelligence values and things of that nature. But regardless of what it was, when I saw our target that we killed that night on target just get filled in by somebody else almost instantly, and now our target deck just added that person, right? But there's 2 wonderful children that I know that don't have their fathers anymore. I started to become a little bit more circumspect about everything we were doing. And so I guess to answer your question, if I was to bring that over sort of into the question that you asked, which was about the intervention, look, I wanted nothing more than for our boys and girls to get out of Afghanistan pronto, period, full stop, get the hell out of there, get out of Iraq, get out of all these wars, because the human factor is real. I mean, there are millions and millions of families across this country who struggle daily with the loss of a loved one. And every one of those people who died overseas is an absolute hero, period, full stop. They answered the call and they went, and they need to be taken care of. Every single one of them needs to be taken care of. If you put that uniform on, you need to be taken care of with every possible asset this nation can muster, period. Yeah. But I absolutely do not want to see our military guys and gals strapped up and going over to fight another war on another country's borders or within their borders. No, absolutely don't, and I understand if people want to do contracts over there and go and support the government and do it, but that's them choosing that themselves.
Right.
You don't have that luxury when you are a military member. You are taking orders to go and fight, right? So I don't have a problem with people who want to go over there and who want to help. But it's also very dangerous. I think it's very dangerous. I think the most dangerous part of this Russia and Ukraine thing right now is you can't figure out what's true. Mm-hmm. I mean, the misinformation and disinformation that's coming out on social media, in the general media, and the mainstream media, I mean, it's night and day. I mean, you can hear one story and then 2 days later find out everything that you thought was true was completely false. And so when you start talking about nuclear armed countries, and you start talking about some stupid lie being able to propagate completely across the globe, I mean, you got to wonder, you got to hope that there are back channel lines of communication to work this stuff out. And so I just hope that that continues to be the case, because this kind of thing can escalate rather quickly.
So just an amazing perspective, folks, from somebody who has earned the right to share that perspective, incidentally. I mean, we all have freedom of speech. We can all talk about it, but this guy's walked the walk. So I thought it was incredibly interesting to see what he had to say. But the interview with Dave Hancock covered a lot more ground than that. In fact, we got an incredible story about his involvement with a guy named Lin Wood. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with Lin Wood, he was the famed First Amendment attorney who represented Richard Jewell in the aftermath of the Centennial Park bombing in Atlanta back in the mid-90s. But Lin Wood has since kind of gone off the deep end. He's been a lawyer for Donald Trump in the aftermath of the allegedly rigged 2020 election. Since then, he has run for chairman of the South Carolina Republican Party, a campaign during which he made some incredibly bizarre claims, to put it politely. Lin Wood has some stories, folks, but some folks have some stories about Lin Wood too. And the stories that Dave Hancock shared with us are just beyond belief. In fact, here's a quick little clip. We'll tease one of them for you.
And while I'm packing my things, Lin barges in, screaming, unhinged, yelling at the top of his lungs again. And he punches me again for a second time. And, you know, the same kind of look, like, oh, geez, man, this guy's whatever, man. So I walk over to the closet, and this is where things get hairy. I walk over to the closet and I start pulling my clothes off of hangers. I'm facing the closet, pulling my clothes off of hangers. I have a pistol on my right. It's a combat pistol. So it doesn't have a physical safety on it. It's an H&K. And I don't have a positive retention holster because I don't expect any lunatic to grab the gun out of my holster. Right. So I'm pulling my clothes off of hangers and I'm just like, Lin, I'm leaving. Lin, I'm leaving. He reaches down because he's behind me now. And I can feel his hot breath on the back of my neck yelling. And I'm just trying to get my stuff, get the hell out of here. And he reaches down and he grabs my pistol out of my holster. And I'm like, what the? And he like just starts waving it around.
Your gun.
My gun. He starts waving it around. And at this point in time, like I've been under threat before. Like, is Lin off his? Anyway, I said, Lin, put it down. Put the gun down. And I start talking to him like an infant, like a child, trying to de-escalate the situation. Lin, put the gun down. It looks like Lin sort of has this kind of epiphany, like he snaps out of it and he looks down and he sees a pistol in his hand and he just chucks it across the room. Just
So obviously this is going to be a crazy interview. Can't wait to run it not only in its entirety, but pull out some of these sections. I had a long talk with Dave, probably an hour and a half we spent together covering a lot of ground, and look forward to sharing that with you on Fitsnews in the coming days. So I want to thank everybody for joining us on the Weekend Review once again as we continue to refine and hone this product. If you want to support what we're doing, Andrea Holloway, our Director of Advertising and Marketing, she's got you covered. Andrea at Fitsnews. Hook it up. But thanks for everybody for watching, for listening, for clicking, for reading, for supporting. Every one of those things helps us do what we do, which is try to hold those in power in the Palmetto State accountable for their actions. Check us next time on your Week in Review.